The winter wind howled across the vast Nevada plains like a vengeful spirit as Zelda Norton stumbled through the snow, her thin cotton dress offering no protection against the biting cold. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with tears that froze against her cheeks. Behind her lay Elko, the town that had been her prison for 2 years, and somewhere in that town, her husband would soon discover she was gone. December 1876 had brought an early snowfall to northeastern Nevada, unusual in its ferocity. Zelda had seized the opportunity when Gordon had passed out drunk by the fire. She had simply walked out the door with nothing but the clothes on her back, a summer dress, and worn-out shoes that were already soaked through with snow. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the man who had nearly killed her more times than she could count. At 23, Zelda's once beautiful face bore the shadows of bruises that had barely healed before new ones took their place. Her golden hair, now matted with blood from where Gordon had grabbed it, hung limply around her face. The storm intensified, and Zelda knew she wouldn't survive the night. Her body trembled violently, fingers and toes already numb. The vast emptiness of the Nevada wilderness stretched before her, beautiful and deadly. As her legs finally gave out, she collapsed into the snow, a small voice in her head whispering that perhaps this was a kinder end than returning to Gordon's fists. "Madam, good Lord, what are you doing out here?" The voice seemed to come from nowhere, and Zelda thought perhaps death had already claimed her. But then strong hands were lifting her from the snow, and she found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Can you hear me?" "Stay awake now," the man urged, his voice deep with concern. He wore a wide-brimmed hat covered in snow, and behind him, a dappled gray horse nickered softly. "Please," Zelda whispered through chattering teeth. "He'll kill me if I go back." The stranger's expression hardened. Without another word, he shrugged off his heavy leather duster and wrapped it around her shivering form. The warmth of the coat, still carrying his body heat, was immediate and overwhelming. "Name's Xavier Jamison," he said, lifting her onto his horse with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. "Folks call me X, and I ain't taking you back nowhere you don't want to go." Xavier climbed up behind her, one arm securing her against his chest while the other took the reins. Zelda felt consciousness slipping away, the combination of cold, pain, and sudden relief too much to bear. "Stay with me, madam," Xavier urged, turning his horse away from Elko. "My cabin's not far, just hold on a little longer." Zelda tried to respond, but darkness claimed her before the words could form. When she next opened her eyes, she was lying on a rough-hewn bed near a crackling fire. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with more books than Zelda had ever seen outside a schoolhouse. The smell of coffee and something savory filled the air. "Welcome back," Xavier said from where he stood at a small stove. He was taller than she'd realized, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of a man who lived by physical labor. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way. "Thought I might lose you for a spell." Zelda tried to sit up but found every muscle protesting. "How long have I been here?" "Just over a day," Xavier replied, pouring coffee into a tin mug. "Storm's still raging, worst we've had in years." Memory returned in a rush and panic seized her. "I need to go. If he finds me, whoever he is, he ain't finding you in this blizzard." Xavier approached, offering the mug with a steadiness that somehow calmed her racing heart. "Drink this. Then we can talk about what happens next." The coffee was black and strong, warming her from the inside out. As the fog of fear began to clear, Zelda took proper stock of her surroundings. Xavier's cabin was isolated. She could tell that much from the absolute silence beyond the howling wind. No neighbors to hear screams, no witnesses. Her fear must have shown on her face because Xavier retreated to the far side of the room, giving her space. "I know how this looks," he said quietly. "Strange man, isolated cabin, but I give you my word no harm will come to you here. When the storm breaks, I'll take you wherever you want to go." "Why would you help me?" Zelda asked, suspicion edging her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Xavier's expression grew solemn. Had a sister once. Her husband beat her near to death more times than I care to count. Last time he finished the job. His jaw tightened. I was too far away to help her. Won't make that mistake again. Shame washed over Zelda. This man had saved her life, and she was treating him like he was Gordon. I'm sorry about your sister, Rebecca, he said softly. Her name was Rebecca. I'm Zelda Norton. Norton? Xavier's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. Not Gordon Norton's wife. Ice filled Zelda's veins. You know him. Know of him. Man's got a reputation in these parts. Xavier's voice had gone flat. Folks in Elko tend to look the other way when it comes to what happens behind closed doors, but rumors spread. Man like that leaves a trail. He'll kill me, Zelda whispered, the mug trembling in her hands. When he finds me, he'll kill me and no one will stop him. He won't find you, Xavier said with quiet conviction. And if he does, he'll have to go through me first. Zelda wanted to believe him, but Gordon had connections, friends in the sheriff's office, business partners with influence. You don't understand. I understand more than you might think, Xavier interrupted gently. Get some rest, Zelda. We'll figure things out tomorrow. True to his word, Xavier kept his distance, sleeping in a chair by the fire while Zelda took the bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the cabin in the wind sent her heart racing, convinced that Gordon had somehow tracked her through the blizzard. Morning brought watery sunlight and a temporary break in the storm. Xavier left briefly to tend to his horse and check his trap lines, returning with rabbits for their meal. As they ate, Zelda found herself studying him. There was something gentle about Xavier, despite his imposing size, a thoughtfulness in his movements, as if he was always aware of how much space he occupied and careful not to encroach on hers. You have a lot of books, Zelda observed, nodding toward the shelves. Reading passes the time when you're snowed in, Xavier replied. Used to teach back east, before the war. You're a teacher. Zelda couldn't hide her surprise. With his buckskins and the knife at his belt, Xavier looked every inch the frontier trapper. He corrected. The war has a way of changing a man's path. Which side? Zelda asked before she could stop herself. Union. Xavier's eyes met hers. My family didn't own slaves, but plenty around us did, saw enough to know which side I belonged on. Something in Zelda relaxed at his words. Gordon had been too young to fight but made no secret of his Confederate sympathies. What about you? Xavier asked. How'd you end up married to a man like Norton? Zelda's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. I was 18, working as a seamstress in San Francisco. My parents had died in a fire the year before. Gordon seemed kind, successful. She gave a bitter laugh. He waited until we were married and 100 miles from anyone I knew before he showed his true nature. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. First time's always a shock. Then they apologize, promise it'll never happen again. Until it does, Zelda whispered, over and over. What made you run now? After 2 years. Zelda hesitated, then slowly pulled back the sleeve of her borrowed shirt. Xavier had given her clean clothes while her dress dried by the fire. A jagged knife wound ran from her wrist nearly to her elbow, crudely stitched. He did that 3 days ago because I spilled coffee on his newspaper, she said, her voice steady now. But it wasn't just that. I found out I'm with child. Xavier's expression darkened, and he knows. No, Zelda pulled the sleeve down. If he knew, he'd have been more careful with his fists. He wants an heir, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring a child into that house. I'd rather die in the snow. For a long moment, Xavier was silent, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. You need somewhere safe until the baby comes. Somewhere Norton won't think to look. Is there such a place? Xavier stood, crossing to a battered trunk in the corner of the cabin. He returned with a folded map, spreading it on the table between them. Here, he said, pointing to a spot far from any marked town. I've got land in Wyoming territory. Good land with water and timber. Been building a proper house there, planning to move come spring. Wyoming? Zelda stared at the map, trying to calculate the distance. That's hundreds of miles. Far enough that Norton's reach won't extend, Xavier said. Winter trail's dangerous, but we could make it. Once there, you'd be safe. Zelda looked up, confused. You'd come with me, Xavier met her gaze steadily. Can't very well send a woman in your condition alone across wilderness in winter. But your life is here, your cabin, your trap lines, nothing here I can't leave behind, Xavier interrupted. Been planning the move anyway, just bumps the timeline up a bit. Zelda stared at him, searching for the lie, the hidden motive, but all she saw in his blue eyes was determination and something that looked remarkably like compassion. Why would you do this for a stranger? Xavier was quiet for a moment. Maybe I'm tired of seeing men like Norton win, he said finally. Or maybe I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for Rebecca. Zelda felt tears threatening and blinked them away. I have nothing to offer in return, no money, no skills beyond basic sewing. Not asking for payment, Xavier said simply. Just offering a way out. The storm returned that night with renewed fury, giving Zelda time to consider Xavier's proposal. She had no illusions about her situation. A pregnant woman alone in the West had few options, none of them good. Gordon would search for her, if only because his pride wouldn't allow his property to escape. And if when he found her, the beating would be worse than anything that had come before. On the third day, as they ate breakfast in companionable silence, Zelda made her decision. When do we leave for Wyoming? Xavier looked up, a brief smile crossing his features. Soon as the storm breaks. Need to gather supplies first. It's a hard journey in good weather in winter. We'll need every advantage. The blizzard lasted another 2 days. During that time, Zelda learned more about the quiet man who had saved her life. Xavier had fought at Gettysburg and Antietam, returned home to find his parents dead from influenza and his sister trapped in a brutal marriage. After Rebecca's death, he'd headed west, unable to stay in a place filled with so many ghosts. He'd been a trapper and occasional guide for 5 years, saving every penny to buy the land in Wyoming. His dream, he told Zelda, was to raise horses and maybe, once the territory was more settled, open a school. Never figured on company, he admitted as they packed supplies on the morning of their departure. But plans change. The journey ahead was daunting, over 300 miles of mountain trails and open plains in the dead of winter. Xavier had traded furs for a second horse, a gentle bay mare for Zelda to ride. Their provisions were packed efficiently, with Xavier insisting they take every one of his books despite the added weight. We leave now. We'll reach my place before the worst of January sets in, he explained, securing the last bundle. Long as we avoid settlements where Norton might have connections, we should be all right. Zelda looked back at the cabin that had been her sanctuary for nearly a week. Will you miss it? Xavier shrugged, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. It was shelter, not home. They set out as the sun crested the mountains, leaving no trace of their departure beyond tracks that the next snowfall would erase. Zelda wore Xavier's coat despite his protests. You're carrying too. I'm just carrying me, and beneath it, her mended dress and a pair of trousers Xavier had altered to fit her smaller frame. The first day's ride was brutal. Though the storm had passed, the temperature remained well below freezing and the snow was deep in places, forcing the horses to labor. Zelda, unaccustomed to long hours in the saddle, found muscles she didn't know she had. By the time Xavier called a halt in a sheltered grove of pines, she was barely able to dismount without falling. We'll make better time tomorrow, Xavier assured her as he built a fire with practiced efficiency. First days always the hardest. They ate jerky and hard biscuits, too tired for proper cooking. As night fully descended, Xavier constructed a lean-to against the deepening cold, lining it with pine boughs and canvas. Sleep, he told her, gesturing to the makeshift shelter. I'll keep watch for a while. Zelda hesitated, eyeing the small space. There's room for 2, she said cautiously. You need rest as much as I do. Xavier studied her face carefully. You sure? We're going to be traveling together for weeks, Zelda said pragmatically. And it's freezing. I trust you, Xavier. Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Most folks who trust me end up regretting it, he said quietly. I'm not most folks, Zelda replied, surprising herself with her certainty. And I'm a good judge of character, had to be growing up in San Francisco. They slept back to back, a respectful distance maintained despite the close quarters. Zelda lay awake long after Xavier's breathing had deepened into sleep, marveling at how completely her life had changed in the span of a week. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The journey settled into a rhythm. They rode from first light until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and for Zelda to stretch her increasingly sore muscles. Xavier was a patient teacher, showing her how to set up camp efficiently, how to start a fire in damp conditions, how to read the landscape for signs of water and shelter. They skirted towns and settlements, wary of word reaching Gordon. When they needed supplies, Xavier would go alone while Zelda waited with the horses, her heart in her throat until his return. So far, luck had been with them. No one seemed to recognize Xavier or question his story of traveling to meet family. As the days passed, Zelda found herself watching Xavier more closely. He was a man of few words but deep thoughts, often quoting poetry or philosophy as they rode. His hands, rough from years of outdoor work, were surprisingly gentle when helping her on and off her horse or checking her wound, which was healing cleanly. 2 weeks into their journey, they made camp in a hidden valley that offered protection from the biting wind. Xavier had managed to shoot a wild turkey, and the smell of roasting meat made Zelda's mouth water. Her pregnancy had progressed enough that her dresses were growing tight, and her appetite had increased dramatically. "You're a good cook," she remarked as Xavier turned the spit. "Better than me, I'm afraid. Necessity," Xavier replied with a slight smile. "Can't live on raw meat and jerky forever." "What will we do when we reach Wyoming?" Zelda asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally finding voice. "What happens then?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I've given that some thought," he said finally. "Cabin's small, but there's room enough. I'll build onto it come spring. As for the rest—" He met her gaze steadily. "That depends on you. On me, you'll be safe there, you and the little one. Can stay as long as you need, no strings. When you're ready to move on, I'll help you get set up somewhere if that's what you want." The offer was generous beyond anything Zelda could have expected, but something in his careful wording made her chest tighten. "And if I don't want to move on?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had dared voice. Xavier's hands stilled on the spit. "Then you wouldn't have to," he said softly. "But that's not a decision you need to make now, not with everything you've been through." Zelda wanted to press further to understand exactly what he was offering, but a noise in the trees behind them cut the conversation short. Xavier was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Get behind me," he murmured, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their campfire. Heart pounding, Zelda did as instructed. Had Gordon found them somehow? Had he sent men after her? The bushes rustled again, and Xavier's finger tightened on the trigger only to relax as a young deer stepped cautiously into the firelight, drawn by the scent of cooking meat. "Just dinner for tomorrow," Xavier said, tension leaving his shoulders. The moment for deeper conversation had passed, leaving Zelda with more questions than answers. They crossed into Wyoming territory 3 days later, the landscape changing from Nevada's harsh desert to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Xavier grew more animated as they traveled, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his previous journeys through the area. "River's just beyond that ridge," he told her one crisp morning. "Follow it north for 2 days and we'll be home." Home. The word sent a complicated mix of emotions through Zelda. She had never really had a home. Her parents' house in San Francisco had been cramped and often filled with the boarders they took in to make ends meet. Gordon's house in Elko had been a prison. The idea of a place that might truly be hers, where she might belong, was both thrilling and terrifying. The river valley was beautiful, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds by steep cliffs to the west and thick forests to the east. Game was plentiful, and Xavier supplemented their dwindling supplies with fresh meat and winter berries that Zelda wouldn't have recognized as edible. On their second day following the river, Xavier grew increasingly alert, scanning the horizon with obvious anticipation. By mid-afternoon, he pointed to a distant plume of smoke rising above the trees. "There," he said, a rare smile lighting his face. "Home." The cabin came into view as they crested a small hill. Unlike Xavier's Nevada shelter, this was a proper house, built of squared logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. A large barn stood nearby, and a corral had been started though not yet completed. The entire clearing was nestled against a backdrop of mountains that turned the late afternoon light to gold. "It's beautiful," Zelda breathed, taking in the scene. "You built all this yourself." "Had some help with the raising," Xavier admitted. "Traders and trappers pass through occasionally. Men are usually willing to work for a hot meal and good whiskey." As they approached, Zelda noticed details that spoke of careful planning. The cabin faced south to catch the winter sun. A well had been dug close to the house, and a kitchen garden lay dormant under the snow, neatly fenced against wildlife. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly spacious. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. A hallway led to two small bedrooms, and stairs suggested an upper level, likely an attic or loft. Simple furniture, a table, chairs, a settee covered in worn but clean fabric gave the space a feeling of comfort despite its frontier simplicity. "It's not finished," Xavier said, misinterpreting Zelda's silence as disappointment. "Planning to add more rooms come spring, maybe glass for the windows instead of oil paper." "It's perfect," Zelda said honestly. After the opulent but cold house in Elko, the warmth and character of Xavier's cabin felt like everything a home should be. Xavier busied himself lighting the fire and bringing in their belongings while Zelda explored. The smaller bedroom had clearly been prepared with thought: a proper bed with a straw mattress, a chest for clothing, even a rocking chair by the window. "Was this for your sister?" Zelda asked when Xavier appeared in the doorway with her pack. A shadow crossed his face. "Had hoped she might come west before it was too late." Zelda touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry, Xavier," he nodded, his expression softening at her touch. "Rest. I'll see to the horses and get supper started." The first week in the cabin established their routine. Xavier rose at dawn to tend the animals in addition to their horses. There were chickens in a coop behind the barn, and a milk cow that had been left in the care of a neighboring homesteader during his absence. Zelda took charge of the household, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort from the basic supplies available. Their conversation that night by the campfire remained unfinished, both seemingly content to let their arrangement exist without defining it. But Zelda caught Xavier watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart beat faster, and she found herself seeking reasons to be near him, asking for help reaching items, sitting closer than necessary by the fire in the evenings. As December gave way to January, Zelda's pregnancy became more visible. Xavier noticed her discomfort and fashioned a support for her back on one of the kitchen chairs, whittled tiny wooden animals for the baby, and without comment, began taking on more of the heavier household tasks. One evening as they sat by the fire, Zelda sewing baby clothes from fabric Xavier had traded furs for, he cleared his throat nervously. "Been thinking," he said, setting aside the harness he was repairing. "People in these parts are scattered, but word travels. Questions will arise about us living here together." Zelda's hands stilled. "I hadn't considered that. Wouldn't normally care what folks think," Xavier continued carefully, "but with the baby coming, might be easier if there weren't rumors. What are you suggesting?" Xavier met her eyes directly. Marriage would be the obvious solution, on paper at least. Zelda felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Marriage would just be a legal arrangement," Xavier hastened to add. "For protection, I wouldn't expect. That is, nothing would change between us." "I see." Zelda resumed her sewing, struggling to keep her expression neutral. "A marriage of convenience." "Exactly." Xavier nodded, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the term. "Would give the baby a name, keep gossip down." The practical part of Zelda knew he was right. An unmarried pregnant woman would be the subject of speculation and judgment, potentially making life difficult for her child. And legally, marriage would protect her from Gordon if he ever tracked her down. A wife couldn't belong to two men simultaneously. And Xavier's claim would supersede Gordon's by virtue of being more recent. But another part of her, A part she'd thought Gordon had beaten into submission, rebelled at the idea of entering another loveless marriage, even one as well-intentioned as Xavier's proposal. "I need time to think," she said finally, setting aside her sewing. Xavier nodded immediately. "Of course." No rush to decide. But that night, alone in her bed, Zelda confronted the truth she'd been avoiding since that night by the campfire. Her feelings for Xavier had grown beyond gratitude or friendship. She admired his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentle way he moved through the world despite all he'd endured. When she imagined her future, he was always part of it. The question was whether Xavier felt the same, or if his proposal was truly just a practical solution to a social problem. The answer came 3 days later during a rare January thaw. Xavier had spent the morning chopping firewood, and Zelda had brought him tea, enjoying the temporary warmth of the winter sun. As she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed, and the contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," Xavier said, his voice lower than usual. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary, and Zelda found herself unable to look away. "Xavier," she began hesitantly, "about your proposal." He set the cup down immediately, giving her his full attention. "You've decided." "I have a question first," Zelda said, gathering her courage. "Is a marriage in name only really what you want?" Xavier went very still. "What are you asking, Zelda?" "I'm asking if you feel something for me beyond obligation or pity." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Because I find myself feeling things for you that go well beyond gratitude." For a terrible moment, Xavier said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, with infinite care, he reached out and took her hand in his. "When I found you in that snowstorm," he said quietly, "I was just trying to do the right thing. Couldn't leave someone to die, especially not a woman, but somewhere between Nevada and here." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I've been alone a long time, Zelda. Thought that's how it would always be, and I'd made my peace with it. Then you came along, and suddenly I'm finding reasons to come back to the cabin instead of staying out hunting all day." Hope blossomed in Zelda's chest. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Xavier confirmed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But I need you to be sure. You've been through hell with Norton. Last thing I want is to rush you into something else you might regret." "I'm sure," Zelda said firmly. "I've spent enough time living in fear to recognize the difference between that and—" She hesitated, the word almost too big to say aloud. "And love." Xavier's eyes widened slightly at her boldness, then crinkled at the corners as a slow smile spread across his face. With deliberate gentleness, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. A kiss so different from Gordon's demanding ones that Zelda felt tears spring to her eyes. When they parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the river crossing," he admitted softly. "Why didn't you?" "Wasn't sure you'd welcome it." Zelda laughed, a sound of pure joy that startled both of them. "I would have, I will." They were married 2 weeks later by a circuit preacher who stopped at their cabin on his regular route through the scattered homesteads. The ceremony was simple, just the two of them, the preacher, and the elderly couple from the nearest farm who served as witnesses. Zelda wore a dress Xavier had purchased on his last supply run, a deep blue that matched his eyes, with her golden hair loose around her shoulders. "Don't reckon I've ever seen a prettier bride," the old farmer's wife declared as she pinned wildflowers somehow preserved from fall into Zelda's hair. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Jamison." Xavier, standing tall and somewhat awkward in his one good shirt, nodded solemnly. "Luckiest man in Wyoming territory, madam." The preacher performed the ceremony by the fireplace, his words simple but meaningful. When it came time for the vows, Xavier surprised Zelda by producing a ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Been carrying it since Nevada," he admitted quietly as he slid it onto her finger. "Just in case you said yes." Their guests departed after a celebratory meal, leaving the newlyweds alone as snow began to fall again outside. Xavier stood by the window, watching the white flakes dance in the gathering dusk. "Mrs. Jamison," he said, testing the name, "has a nice sound to it." Zelda joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Better than Norton." Xavier's arm went around her shoulders, drawing her close. "You're safe now," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you." That night, they truly became husband and wife, Xavier's touch healing wounds deeper than the physical ones Gordon had inflicted. In his arms, Zelda discovered that intimacy could be gentle, that a man's strength could shelter rather than harm. And Xavier, who had known only loneliness for so many years, found home in the softness of Zelda's embrace. Winter settled fully over their valley, deep snows making travel difficult. They existed in a peaceful bubble, their days filled with work, and their evenings with conversation or reading aloud from Xavier's books. As Zelda's pregnancy progressed, Xavier took on more household duties, insisting she rest while he cooked and cleaned. "Never thought I'd see a man so handy with a broom," Zelda teased one evening as Xavier swept the floor with methodical care. "Army teaches a man to keep things tidy," he replied with a wink, "and I've been bachelor long enough to know work doesn't do itself." February brought cabin fever, and their first real argument, a trivial disagreement about where to store preserved foods that escalated when Zelda's hormones and Xavier's protective instincts clashed. They made peace quickly, both shaken by the brief discord and determined not to let small matters come between them. "I'm not him," Xavier said that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "When we disagree, I'll never raise my hand to you. Need you to know that deep down." "I do know," Zelda assured him, covering his hand with hers. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The baby kicked then, a strong movement that made them both laugh in surprised delight. "Got a fighter there," Xavier observed proudly. "Takes after his mama." "Could be a girl," Zelda reminded him, though she privately agreed with his assessment. The child moved with such determination that she sometimes felt she was carrying a tiny pugilist. "Girl would be fine too," Xavier said easily. "Long as she's healthy and has your smile." As March approached, bringing slightly warmer days and the first hints of spring, Zelda began preparing for the birth in earnest. The nearest midwife was 20 miles away, and Xavier fretted about the possibility of the baby coming during a late-season storm when roads would be impassable. "We should be prepared to manage on our own," Zelda said practically, as she packed a basket with clean linens and the supplies the midwife had recommended during her one visit. "Women have been having babies without help since the beginning of time." "Not making me feel better," Xavier grumbled, but he studied the midwife's instructions carefully and rode out to ensure their nearest neighbors knew to come if he signaled with the mirror system they'd established. The baby, however, had plans of his own. 2 weeks before Zelda's estimated time, on a clear April morning as Xavier was repairing the chicken coop, her water broke. "Xavier," she called from the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, "I think it's time." The look of panicked determination on his face as he rushed to her side would have been comical under other circumstances. Despite his initial alarm, Xavier proved remarkably steady throughout her labor, which progressed rapidly. By sunset, Zelda held their son, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire valley. "Samuel," Xavier whispered, one finger gently tracing the baby's perfect cheek, "after my father." He looked to Zelda for approval. "Samuel Jamison," Zelda agreed, exhausted but radiantly happy. "It's perfect." The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustments as they learned to function with little sleep and a newborn's unpredictable schedule. Xavier took to fatherhood with natural ease, as comfortable changing diapers as he was breaking horses. His tenderness with Samuel revealed a depth of emotion that made Zelda fall even more deeply in love with him. By summer, they had settled into a new routine. The cabin had been expanded with a larger kitchen and a proper nursery. The vegetable garden flourished under Zelda's care, and Xavier had acquired 2 more horses for his fledgling breeding operation. Their isolated existence gradually opened to include more regular visitors, neighbors, traders, and occasionally, families passing through on their way further west. One sweltering July afternoon, as Zelda sat on the porch nursing Samuel, she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon, riders approaching, more than the usual 1 or 2. Xavier noticed as well, setting aside his work on a new corral gate. "Stay inside," he said quietly, lifting his rifle from its place above the door. Probably nothing, but better safe. Zelda's heart raced as she gathered Samuel and retreated into the cabin. Through the window, she watched Xavier stand calmly on the porch, rifle not quite aimed but ready as 5 riders approached. The lead rider raised his hand in greeting, and even from a distance, Zelda could see the glint of a sheriff's badge. Fear gripped her had Gordon finally found her. Had he convinced a lawman to help retrieve his stolen property? Unable to bear the suspense, Zelda moved to the door. Samuel clutched protectively to her chest. She could hear the conversation now. Looking for a Gordon Norton, the sheriff was saying. Man from Elko, Nevada. Understand he might have passed this way. Can't say I've met anyone by that name, Xavier replied evenly. What's he wanted for? Murder, the sheriff said bluntly. Killed a saloon girl in Elko last month, then a deputy who tried to arrest him. Been tracking him through 3 territories. The breath left Zelda's lungs in a rush. Gordon wanted for murder. The irony might have made her laugh if not for the seriousness of the situation. My wife might know something, Xavier said, turning toward the cabin. Zelda. Taking a deep breath, Zelda stepped onto the porch, Samuel still in her arms. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in her appearance. Madam, he said, tipping his hat. Sorry to trouble you, we're looking for a dangerous man. Gordon Norton is my former husband, Zelda said clearly, feeling Xavier stiffen beside her. I haven't seen him since December when I fled Elko. The sheriff's expression sharpened with interest. Former husband? She's my wife now, Xavier stated firmly. Legal and proper. Got papers to prove it. One of the deputies leaned forward in his saddle. She matched the description, Sheriff, the one Norton's been looking for. The sheriff studied Zelda thoughtfully. Norton's been telling folks his wife was kidnapped by a trapper, offering rewards for information. I wasn't kidnapped, Zelda said, anger giving her courage. I escaped after 2 years of beatings that nearly killed me. Mr. Jamison saved my life when he found me half frozen in the snow. Everything that followed was my choice. The sheriff nodded slowly. Had my suspicions about Norton's story. Man like that, quick to anger, free with his fists around women. Seen the type before. Do you know where he is now? Xavier asked, his hand finding Zelda's shoulder in silent support. Trail went cold near the Utah border, the sheriff admitted. But he's still out there, and from what we've heard, he's obsessed with finding his wife. You folks should be careful. We will be, Xavier assured him. And if Norton shows his face around here, I'll be happy to help you collect him. After the lawman departed with promises to send word if Norton was captured, Zelda sat heavily on the porch steps, Samuel fussing against her shoulder. He's still looking for me, she whispered. After all this time. Xavier knelt before her, taking her free hand. And he won't find you. But if he does, his expression hardened. I meant what I said to the sheriff. Norton will regret it if he comes here. That night, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Zelda and Xavier lay awake, talking in low voices about what they'd learned. The threat of Gordon cast a shadow over their happiness, but Zelda refused to let fear dictate their lives again. We can't live waiting for him to appear, she said firmly. I won't give him that power over us. Xavier pulled her closer. We won't, but we'll be prepared just in case. Summer passed into fall with no sign of Gordon. Samuel grew stronger daily, developing Xavier's serious expression and Zelda's infectious laugh. The homestead prospered. Xavier's horses gained a reputation for quality, and Zelda's vegetable garden produced enough excess that they were able to trade with neighbors and passing wagon trains. As winter approached again, they celebrated Samuel's first birthday and their first anniversary as a family with quiet joy. The cabin that had once felt spacious now seemed perfectly sized for their small family. Warm with love and the security that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. On a crisp November morning, Zelda stood at the kitchen window watching Xavier show Samuel the new foal born during the night. The baby, now toddling confidently, shrieked with delight as the wobbly-legged creature nuzzled his outstretched hand. The scene was so perfect, so complete, that Zelda barely registered the movement at the edge of the clearing until it resolved into a lone rider approaching slowly. Her heart stuttered as recognition dawned the way the man sat his horse, the familiar tilt of his head, Gordon. For a moment she was paralyzed, the old terror washing over her. Then Samuel's laugh cut through her fear, reminding her of everything at stake. She grabbed Xavier's pistol from the drawer and ran outside. "Xavier," she called, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Take Samuel inside." Xavier looked up, instantly alert. When he saw the rider, his expression hardened, but he didn't question her. Scooping Samuel into his arms, he strode quickly to the cabin, passing Zelda on the porch. "Stay inside," he murmured. "I'll handle this." "No," Zelda said firmly, pressing the pistol into his hand. "We'll handle it together. He's seen me now, hiding won't help." Gordon had stopped his horse at the edge of the yard, watching their exchange with cold calculation. He looked thinner than Zelda remembered, his once handsome face haggard and marked by a new scar across one cheek. His clothes were travel-worn, but the rifle resting across his saddle gleamed with careful maintenance. "Zelda," he called, his voice carrying the false pleasantness she remembered from their courting days. "Been looking for you a long time, wife." Xavier stepped slightly in front of her, the pistol held casually at his side. "She's not your wife anymore, Norton." Gordon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Law says differently. Can't have two husbands at once, even out here in the wilderness." "We have papers," Zelda said, stepping forward to stand beside Xavier. "Legal divorce on grounds of cruelty, filed in Wyoming territory. You have no claim to me or my son." It was a bluff. There had been no divorce, no legal proceedings. Their marriage had been valid based on the assumption that Gordon wouldn't pursue her. But Zelda knew Gordon well enough to understand that uncertainty might make him hesitate. Gordon's expression flickered. "Convenient stories. But I've come to take back what's mine, and I won't leave without you." "There's a warrant for your arrest," Xavier stated flatly. "Murder charges. Sheriff's been through here looking for you." "Unfortunate misunderstanding," Gordon replied with a dismissive wave. "Woman shouldn't have fought back. Deputy shouldn't have interfered." His casual reference to murder chilled Zelda to the bone. The man she'd married had been cruel, but this Gordon had crossed into something darker, something irredeemable. "You should go," she said clearly. "There's nothing for you here." Gordon's false smile vanished. "You belong to me," he snarled. "Everything you are is mine by right. I made you, I can unmake you." In one fluid motion, he raised his rifle and aimed it directly at Xavier. "Step away from her, trapper. This is between me and my wife." Xavier didn't move. "Last warning, Norton. Ride away now, you get to live another day." Gordon's finger tightened on the trigger just as the cabin door creaked open behind them. Samuel, having escaped whoever was watching him inside, toddled onto the porch, babbling happily. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Gordon's aim shifted slightly toward the sound. Xavier lunged forward, raising his pistol. And Zelda, acting purely on maternal instinct, threw herself toward her son. Two shots rang out simultaneously, shattering the morning stillness. Birds erupted from nearby trees, their panicked flight punctuating the sudden, deafening silence that followed. Zelda clutched Samuel to her chest, her ears ringing, unable to process what had happened until she felt Xavier's hand on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice seemed to come from very far away. She shook her head, finally looking up to see Gordon slumped over his saddle, blood spreading across his chest. His rifle lay in the dirt where it had fallen from lifeless fingers. "Is he?" "Yes," Xavier confirmed grimly, keeping himself between her and the sight. "It's over, Zelda. He can't hurt you anymore." They buried Gordon on the far edge of their property, a simple, unmarked grave that only they would know. Xavier rode to the nearest settlement to report the incident to the local lawman, who, upon hearing the circumstances and confirming Norton's identity against the wanted posters, ruled it a justified shooting. "Man was wanted for murder anyway," the deputy said with a shrug. "You did everyone a favor, saving the cost of a trial and hanging." But the encounter left its mark on their family. For weeks afterward, Zelda woke from nightmares in which Gordon returned, in which Xavier wasn't fast enough, in which Samuel paid the price for her escape. Xavier held her through these dark moments, his steady presence eventually convincing her that the danger had truly passed. As winter deepened around them, bringing the peaceful isolation they had come to cherish, healing began. Samuel, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to tragedy, continued to thrive, taking his first real steps across the cabin floor on Christmas Day. "He's going to be running before spring," Xavier predicted proudly as their son tottered between them, tiny hands reaching confidently for support. "Just like his father," Zelda agreed, watching the man who had saved her in every way possible, strong and sure. When spring arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Xavier surprised Zelda with a gift, a new coat to replace the one he had wrapped around her that snowy day in Nevada. "Thought it was time you had one that actually fits," he said as she admired the soft buckskin, beautifully tanned and lined with rabbit fur. "Though I admit, I was rather fond of seeing you in mine." Zelda touched the coat reverently, then set it aside to embrace her husband. "I'll always remember that day," she whispered against his chest. "How you gave me your coat and then your future." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made." Their future stretched before them. As vast and promising as the Wyoming sky, more children would join Samuel in the years to come. The homestead would grow into a proper ranch, and their love would deepen with each passing season. But in that moment, holding each other in the home they had built together, they needed nothing more than the simple, profound gift they had given each other. A second chance built on courage, compassion, and the unshakable certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be.